this video, we'll be talking another type of interaction between the organisms or the population of a species, and that is competition. Competition is considered to be one of the most important type of interaction among the population, and it is actually the type of interspecific interaction when the two species compete with each other for similar type of resources, and these resources can be like they can compete for food, they can compete for let's say the space, or maybe for the reproduction or other reasons. So we find competition existing between the population of a species and is very important for the organic evolution. This was even confirmed by Darwin, who considered that interspecific competition among the species is most essential for organic evolution. Now, when we are talking of the competition among the species, there are various terms associated with it. That is, interference competition, the competition release, Gauss's exclusion principle, and resource partitioning. Before we start with all this, you have to keep in mind that in this competition, both the species are harmed. That means none of the species get the benefit. The first example is of the that is in when we try to understand that interference competition, it is actually when the resources are not limiting. So when we talk of interference competition, here the important thing is that it can happen when the resources are not limited. So both the species will be having an easy access to all kinds of resources. But here the species is affected, any one of the species is affected due to the presence of another species which is more efficient in feeding capacity. So if we talk of food, suppose species A has better feeding efficiency, it will this is species A which is having better feeding efficiency, so it will affect species B comparatively, whose feeding efficiency is poor feeding efficiency. Now this is interference competition. It is when the resources are not limiting and the feeding efficiency of one species is reduced by the presence of another species, and that's why this will have an inhibitory effect of this due to this species, and as a result the presence of species, the one which is weaker or has poor feeding efficiency, will have interfering and inhibitory effect. That's why the name interference competition. So competition is a process in which the fitness, that is the efficiency we talk of in terms, that is which is measured as R is equal to, that is R is the fitness or the intrinsic rate of growth or increase. Growth, that is effectively lowered in presence of another species which is more fit. This is a very easily understanding, like it can be easily understood. This R rate, intrinsic rate of growth of a species, is highly affected in presence of another species which is having a better or better fitness or is more efficient in fighting for the resource. So this is given by actually an example, and it is by the Albingdon tortoise of Galapagos Island. Now, how we can understand this? Abingdon tortoise, over here, if we take this, Abingdon tortoise, and it had a poor feeding capacity, and it became extinct when the goats, obviously the goats will be having better efficiency in feeding, and this happened in Galapagos Islands. So what happened was, goats were introduced in the Galapagos Island, where it was initially inhabited by tortoise. Now, due to the better feeding efficiency of the goats, over a certain period of time, that is nearly a decade or so, Abingdon tortoise became extinct because the most or the resources, that was the food, that was mostly taken up by the goat. So here the intrinsic rate of growth of tortoise was affected due to the presence of another species which is more efficient in fighting for the resources. This is what is interference competition. Now, when we talk of competition release, competition release is a condition which is seen when a distribution of a species is restricted to a small geographical area. So, what happens is, because of the presence of a better species, that is the superior species, it expands its range, that is the habitat range is increased dramatically when that competing species is removed from there. So what happens is, uh, the species which is actually have facing the competition, it expands, or its range when the superior species is removed from that particular geographical area. And this was proven by Connell's field experiments. Now, what he said was, Connell's field experiments prove the competition release. Now, he observed during his experiments that in the Scotland, that is the sea coasts of Scotland, there were large barnacle, that is balanus. So, in Scotland, they were large species of barnacle, and it was much more superior, which was there, and it actually removed the smaller barnacle, that is the species which is Cametholus. So this species was removed from that particular zone. When we see generally when we see, we find that the herbivores and the plants are most effectively, or more they are more adversely harmed or affected by the competition than the carnivores, because carnivores are present at the higher trophic level, and they actually give severe competition to the herbivores, and herbivores also and the plants also are therefore mostly they have a negative effect of the competition. Now another is the Gauss's exclusion principle. Gauss's exclusion principle says that it states that the two closely related species which compete for the same resources, they cannot exist together, and the competitively the one which is inferior will be eliminated eventually. So this means that two species, and these two species which are closely related, these two species are closely related, and also they are competing for similar resources. The one which is weaker will be eliminated. So elimination, whose elimination from that particular area will take place? Elimination of weaker species will happen. Now this is actually Gauss's competitive exclusion principle. Now this is especially true when the resources are limited. When the resources, that means a fixed resources or the resources are limited, then the two species which are closely related will compete for the similar resources, and there will be elimination of the weaker principles. Now most of the studies recently are not favoring the Gauss's competitive exclusion principle. They suggest, these further theories suggest that like instead of getting completely eliminated, the weaker species might evolve or might develop certain mechanisms to face the competition, and instead of elimination they may coexist together, then the exclusion. So this is known as partitioning. This is one of the methods, like what it is saying, this is the Gauss's exclusion principle, but it's there are scientists which say that the species, weaker species, might develop mechanisms or might develop methods alternative methods, we can say, over a period of time, and the species, both the species may coexist together, and this is done by resource partitioning. Resource partitioning means that they will be sharing the resources but at different levels. Like, for example, they can have different times of feeding, or maybe they might like we have some examples where many species coexist together, but due to the different feeding habits, that means the different timings of the feeding, or they can have other reference for food. Now MacArthur give this example that nearly five closely related species of warblers, they can live on the same tree, and they avoid the competition and they exist together due to the behavioral disturbances. So, resource partitioning is actually a method in which species facing competition might evolve mechanism. They might evolve the mechanism, and actually they the mechanisms promote to existence rather than the exclusion. So this is the Gauss's exclusion principle, competitive exclusion principle, and resource partitioning is a mechanism where the elimination of a weaker species is not there, but instead a mechanism for coexistence between the species A and species B is possible. So, competition offers a very good mechanism by which the species may evolve over a period of time.